The Knicks. So I sent you a long list of things with the Knicks because there's so much up in the air, it feels like. Julius Randle exists. What do we do with Julius Randle if you're a New York Knicks fan?
I think it's hard to see them moving him just because.
Okay.
So they gave him the 4-year extension last year. It's $106 million at least. There's some incentives in there as well, but it's about $106 million. And it's not as bad as it sounds off the bat. Like his salary is like, I don't think it's going to be, it's right on the edge of the top 50 in the NBA.
Yeah.
So $26 million a year isn't what it used to be, but I think it's viewed as a net negative value contract, at best a net neutral contract. And the extension doesn't even kick in until next season. So, I mean, if you're the Knicks, you're coming off a 37-win season. You know, they talk about how much they value the young guys that they have and how much the front office values the young guys. And they do have a large quantity of young guys. I mean, if you include Mitchell Robinson, who's a free agent, they have 8 guys 24 and under right now. And I don't see a way where they throw in one of their first round picks to offload Randle or throw in Emmanuel quickly to offload Randle. Like I don't see that happening. If you trade him now, you're trading him at his lowest value. So I think their best chance, even if they desperately want to trade him, I think the best way to do it, unless they just find someone who loves Julius Randle and thinks they can turn him around, I think the best way for them to play it is just to rehab his value internally and then, you know, maybe trade him when he's at his peak. That was the original plan when they signed Julius Randle. Yeah. It was, he's going to be really good. And then when he's really good, you can flip him and get some stuff for him as part of this whole reconstruction of the team. And then it turned out he was so good. They were like, we're just going to extend him. And now we're back to square one, where if they can make him really good, they can flip him.
So I guess here's my thing. I don't think Julius Randle would take much to get rid of. Like, I think there are teams that would take Julius Randle. He's, like you said, not a net negative. He's like a pretty net neutral value and is productive. Like, say whatever you will about Julius Randle, he is productive and he is like a good basketball player. And good basketball players going forward in the NBA make way more than $26 million. So I don't know, man. I wonder if the hate on the Randle contract, and maybe this is me having watched like 15 Knicks games last year instead of 82 Knicks games, right? And Knicks fans are probably like, no, the accumulative experience of watching Julius Randle is incredibly frustrating. But I feel like we've gone maybe a little bit too far in the hate on Julius Randle. Like, he didn't have a great year, but he's still good at basketball. Like, I don't know. I think someone would take a bet on him.
Here's the problem with Randle. His shot selection is extremely concerning. He's so jump shot reliant. And when he won Most Improved, it was in part because all of a sudden he became this awesome 3-point mid-range shooter. And last year that completely fell off. I mean, he was the worst mid-range shooter in the league of anybody who took as many mid-range shots as him. And he was one of the worst 3-point shooters in the league of anybody who took as many as him. I believe, if I forget what the qualifiers are on this, but amongst like basically guys who have a normal or higher usage, who you can consider like rotation guys, I believe he had the second worst true shooting percentage in the NBA, ahead of only Jalen Suggs, who's not the only guy you want to be ahead of. I mean, he really struggled offensively as a rookie. His shot selection makes him so inefficient. And part of that, I do genuinely believe, is because the Knicks floor spacing is awful. I mean, their crunch time offense was Julius Randle, brush screen, and then ball handler tosses it into him 18 feet in the high post, and he's just going to line him up, and then he's going to maybe shoot a step back or take one dribble in and shoot a 12-foot step back. And that's just kind of what the crunch time offense became. And I think,
wait, I guess here's my thing. So to combine the two teams you used to cover, right?
Sure.
Why does Washington not move Kyle Kuzma and Rui Hachimura for him? If we're talking like purely the Knicks are just trying to get rid of the contract, right? Because Washington is trying to win right now with whatever they have for reasons far beyond my comprehension. You have this fit with Kristaps Porzingis, which is the guy that people have wanted Julius Randle to play with forever. Does this not make sense?
I mean, my answer, because Kyle Kuzma had a better year than Julius Randle last year. Kyle Kuzma is, I think he's a much more competent defender.
But are you really going to bet on that to continue, I guess? Like, if you can find a situation for Julius Randle that makes sense for Julius Randle next to Bradley Beal, next to Kristaps, is Julius Randle just not a better player than Kyle Kuzma?
I think Randle next to Kristaps is, ironically, I think Randle next to Kristaps is a really good fit for him. Part of the reason why I mentioned the shot selection and the fit, and I mentioned the offense, part of it is that he plays next to a rim diving center for almost all of his minutes. The Knicks don't play him next to a 5, and they don't have the closest thing the Knicks have to a stretch 5 is when Taj Gibson goes to the corner, and he took like 13 corner threes this year. And that's the closest thing the Knicks have to a stretch 5. I mean, Mitchell Robinson might be the single most paint dwelling player in the NBA. And when I say paint dwelling, I don't mean the percentage of his shots that come from the paint, which is 100, by the way. I mean, like the percentage of time. And that's not an exaggeration. I'm not being like, oh, it's ironically 100. No, he literally takes 100% of his shots in the paint. And he took like 3 shots outside of the restricted area last year, and they were still in the paint. But I don't even mean that. I mean time spent in the paint. He just doesn't really stray from it because they put such an emphasis on him being an offensive rebounder as well, because he's an excellent offensive rebounder, and he just hangs there. So he'll it's almost like he plays offense the same way that like Brook Lopez plays defense, where he just 29s the paint on offense. And Julius Randle doesn't have a driving lane, and this affects RJ Barrett too. So the Knicks offense is schematically flawed, no question. And playing next to a guy like Kristaps, I think would naturally make Julius Randle way better. He goes at the rim in the rare moments when he doesn't play next to a paint dwelling 5. He goes at the rim way more. The numbers bear that out. He goes to the rim almost twice as much when he doesn't play next to one of those rim diving centers. So I think you're right. He would be better, but I mean, why wouldn't I do that if I were Washington? Because if you re-sign Bradley Beal to a $245 million contract, and you have Julius Randle there as well, and you have Kristaps there as well, you're kind of locked in. And I think you're locked into a roster that is not getting you.
Oh, let me be clear. This is absolutely not what I would do. I would move all of these guys if I was Washington. I would have moved them 2 years ago.
But even if I put myself, even if I put myself into Ted Leonsis' mind, and I was like, you have to re-sign Bradley Beal because that's what we do in Washington. If we get an all-star, we bring him back. And that's the way that Ted Leonsis thinks. Even if I were that, and I cosplay as Ted Leonsis right now, I still don't need to lock myself into that, because that's an organization that just wants to make the playoffs from an ownership perspective, no question. But I don't think that just gets you into the playoffs, to be honest. And defensively, I think you potentially have a massive issue, because Randle was just he was a real problem
terrible
defensively.
Real horrible problem last year defensively.
He was much better 2 years ago, but last year was a real problem.
Look, I'm just trying to come up with ideas for a bad situation in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, do you think Portland bites?
What I would do
if Portland misses out on Jeremy Grant?
So it's hard for Portland because Portland can't take him into the trade exception, right? Because these contracts a little bit too big. Mm-hmm. I think it's easier for them for guys that are under $20 million. So, or right around, I forget what the exception's exact number is, but
20.9 million.
Yeah, Grant fits exactly into the exception.
Yeah, somehow. Grant makes $9,000 less. It's perfect.
Yeah. So I think it's harder for them in this situation to go for Randle. I don't mind it. If I was them, I would probably rather have Julius Randle than Yusuf Nurkic, I think, because I think he's just better than Nurkic, and Nurkic has the injury questions. I think I would rather have Randle than Nurkic going forward. But would I rather have Randle at what is it? It's like 26.
Yeah, it's about 26. It's 106 million guaranteed over 4 years.
So, 26 and a half over Nurkic at 17, maybe it is for 3 years. I don't know. Like, I'm just spitballing on Nurkic as well, but like, I don't know. I don't know. I think if you're trying to keep Damian Lillard happy, Danny LaRue and I talked about last time, like if you're Portland, you're trying to spin your wheels to essentially get the team sold. Like, what do you do there? I don't know. I think that's a hard one. I don't know what they do with Randle, but obviously
what if he
big question of the summer.
I have not thought about this at all, to be clear. What if he goes to like Utah in a Rudy Gobert trade? Mitchell Robinson doesn't come back.
Mitchell Robinson doesn't come back. So you're doing Rudy for Julius Randle.
You need to throw in more salary. Those don't match.
Oh, and you probably have to throw in RJ too, because you're taking a net neutral contract for a guy who's awesome.
Yeah, I don't think you would throw in RJ if you were trading for Gobert. I think you would make up for it with. I mean, the Knicks have all their own first round picks. They have Dallas's 2023 pick.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you just throw in probably a couple of picks. You got to make up some more salary, but they have a bunch of expirings. They got Kemba on $9 million expiring, Burks on $10 million expiring, Noel on $9 million expiring. I mean, you can get there with those expiring, so you can get to the Gobert salary, and then you throw in picks. And if Utah doesn't want picks, they want to be good now. They want to win with Donovan Mitchell. Then you give them Randle. You bring in a third team. You send the third team those picks, and that third team maybe send something else to Utah. And you have to give up those expirings. You can use the expirings to bring in another piece.
I think I like that. Here's the other question I wanted to ask you. If you're the Knicks, do you prioritize getting a center? Because Obi Toppin was really good to end the year last year. And while, plays is like a John Collins-y type where he's like floating between the 4 and the 5, right? What do you do with Obi Toppin is what I'm struggling with now. And how does he fit into this mix? Because Obi Toppin, you'll know the numbers better. I think the numbers are like he averaged like 20 and 9, like in his starts or something. Like it was like something crazy. When he played a lot of minutes, Obi Toppin was really good. And I don't know how to square the circle with the Knicks right now. They just have a lot of like pieces that don't fit together. I wonder if they all would fit together if they just kind of like reset and don't keep Mitchell Robinson and then move Julius Randle.
Yeah, I would with Obi Toppin. They have to give him some kind of opportunity. His last 5 games of the year, he dropped 20, he dropped 20, he dropped 19, he dropped 35, and then he dropped 42 when he finally got an opportunity. And I'm not big into overanalyzing end of season numbers from totally meaningless games. But man, he is so active. He's a really interesting player, and he's difficult to evaluate because I think basketball fans and okay, here's what I'll say about this. So I had a scout tell me once, and I thought it was so well said, that he said whenever he watches a player who whenever he's like scouting players, he said he has to remind himself that all scouts have a bias toward players who look the part. They have, and we were talking about, I forget who we were talking about at the time, but it was, he was referring to 6'8", athletic, flows well, big hands, broad shoulders, looks the part, right? And all scouts have a bias towards looks the part. And he says he has to remember that he has that bias too. Because ultimately, if you don't put your actual talents into skills, it doesn't matter how athletic you are. If I ask you, how good is this player? And you say, oh, he's really good. He's athletic and he jumps high and he's fast and he's quick. And those aren't skills. Those are things that you can use to create skills. And with Obi, it's really interesting. I don't know if he's the best example of this, but I think he's kind of the exact opposite of that. He's an unbelievable athlete. I mean, he literally won the dunk contest. But with Obi, look, at least at this point, it's not a 3-point shooter.
Well, he's short arms and he's kind of stiff, to be honest.
Right. He's not a 3-point shooter. He doesn't have flexible hips. That's his thing. He doesn't have the flexible hips, which stunts his defense. You need to, if you're going to be a good player in the NBA, you need to have at least one, probably two, hopefully three of 3-point shooter, can create your own shot, or can play defense at an average to above average level. And right now, Obi does not consistently have any of those three things. And yet you watch him play and you're like, that dude can play. He is.
Yeah, totally.
He is the opposite of it. You know, he's a unique sort of player. You know who I think he reminds me of? When I watch Larry Nance, I feel similarly, where I'm like, that dude is just so active. He is always doing something, and it's beyond just playing hard.
Yeah. Larry has more intuitive defensive knowledge, and I think does move it. He has much better hip flexibility, which allows him to be better defensively. But I understand where you're going with this. Continue.
Yeah. I mean, just I think Obi has that same sort of intuitiveness as a screener, though. I mean, he is an extraordinary screener and cutter. And I think in some ways they just kind of use him in the corner. Like, man, if they could just use him as a screener and roller, he could be amazing at that.
Oh yeah. You need to, this is maybe, there's no way the Pacers would take Julius Randle. Do you think? Right. Cause I wonder if you could do
honestly
Miles Turner and then pair him with Obi Toppin, release Mitchell Robinson out into the wild, and do something like that.
Yeah. I mean that, and look, Turner is the ideal guy next to Julius Randle. I've written that.
Yeah.
Like he's the ideal guy because Tom Thibodeau, the thing with that this all comes back to is that.
Well, I'm saying that you don't use Turner with Randle. I'm saying you use Turner with Toppin. I mean, if you're Indiana, honestly, interesting too, right? Like you know, maybe Malcolm Brogdon for Julius Randle or something like that, but you just sign Brogdon to the extension. Like, I don't know if you do that either.
Yeah. I think you might be able to get better than that for Brogdon too. Also, it depends on what you want back. If you're Indiana, like, do you want picks and young players, or do you want a player who you can compete with? Like if I'm running Indiana, I don't necessarily need all picks, but I want somebody on Tyrese Halliburton's timeline, you know?
I wonder if
grow with him.
If they end up at 6 and they end up with Jaden Ivey or something like that, or maybe they move up to 4 or something like that, they could do something like, I don't know. I threw out like a weird one. Like if they really truly were absolutely in love with Jaden Ivey, because I really like Jaden Ivey, like, could you do something like Duarte in 6 for 4 because you think Jaden Ivey's like a future all-star, and, you know, as good as Chris Duarte is, and he's very, very good, if you can get a future all-star that you think has that kind of ceiling, you do it. And then you pair Jaden Ivey with Tyrese Halliburton in the backcourt. That's like the most fun combination I can think of for a backcourt, really. And maybe then it's like Malcolm Brogdon for Julius Randle and like a young guy or something like that with the Knicks. And you're kind of cooking with gas at that point.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting one. The thing with Obi that I think could be just the move, if you're going to bring back somewhat of a similar roster, is you could just go into the season with a starting center. And I mean, you'll have Jericho Sims on the roster because he showed some stuff as a rookie. I think he's going to be a nice rotation player. But I mean, you could just go into the season with no backup center. Say Obi Toppin's your backup center, because they have to find minutes for him. Like, he was the number 8 pick. He was the number 8 pick, and he hasn't gotten an opportunity because I was getting into this, that Tibbs believes that this is just his basketball ethos. He wants somebody to protect the rim on the floor at all times. And it doesn't have to be somebody who is paint dwelling, but the only rim protectors the Knicks have on their roster are guys who hang around the rim on offense. And I think Obi, the thing with Obi that's interesting is he's kind of a 4 defensively, because he's not this rim protector, even though he can block some shots and he can get up there, obviously. But I think he might be better as a 5 on offense, and you can just run pick and rolls with him. And he's this insane lob threat, and he's a really good screener. And he's a smart screener and he's a smart cutter. Like, he is really one of the best cutters in the game and is tremendous in transition. Like, he could run other fives out of the gym if you made a 5 guard him, because he is like, there are a lot of guards and just ball handlers who can control the pace of a game. You put them in the game and they just control the pace of the game. The game speeds up because they speed up. There are a lot of them. There aren't very many off-ball guys who control the pace of a game, especially off-ball reserve players. And if you put Obi Toppin in a game, like the Knicks pace, it's just like they go from being this slog of a team with Randle out there to like, look at them flying. And it's like, just because Obi Toppin just goes, like, he's one of the fastest bigs in the league. And like, they got to find some way. You can't draft a guy at 8 and play him 15 minutes a game when he's actually shown promise, and never give him an opportunity, and then have him come in for a 3rd year, give him the same role, and then not know what to do when he's extension eligible the next season and heading into restricted free agency. Like, you have to know, like, is he a good 3rd big? Is he a good starter? Like, they cannot say for certain what he is, and they should have a better idea of what he is.
Okay. So we spent an hour on 3 teams so far, and we're not done with the Knicks, because the other 3 things with the Knicks are, do they make a full court press of Jalen Brunson? Just hired Rick Brunson. What are we doing? It seems pretty obvious to me that they would like Jalen Brunson if they can facilitate it with Dallas. Like, am I wrong about that?
No, I think they would like Jalen Brunson. I don't know if it'll. I mean, he could just go back to Dallas. Mark Cuban was talking at the end of the year, like they're going to make him a formidable offer. I mean, I think if he doesn't go back to Dallas, like, you know, maybe he's just frustrated. Dallas could have extended him. Sounds like he wanted an extension. The extension would have been way less than he's actually going to get on the open market now. So he's lucky that he didn't get that extension. But I don't know, maybe he's upset he didn't get the extension and he goes, but like, I think Dallas is going to make him a very formidable offer. The Knicks don't have cap space, but if they really want to open up cap space to sign Jalen Brunson, they can do it. Like, they can get up to a little more than $20 million of room for the offseason. Like, you can just, Burks is on expiring, Noel's on expiring. You can just find some place to dump those guys. You can stretch Kemba Walker, and you've opened up a little more than $20 million of room, and you can make a good, fair, legitimate offer that Jalen Brunson is going to respond to. So, you know, I don't know what he's going to end up getting. I think somewhere in the realm of $20 million a year sounds pretty good, but he just had a hell of a postseason, so it might be more.
Going to be more than 20. Yeah,
yeah.
Like, I was kind of wondering. So Oklahoma City has been kind of trying to figure out, like, you know, what do we use this expiring cap space bomb that we have on our team with? They also want to maintain flexibility. Do you think the Knicks would be willing to move one of those Dallas first rounders that are going to be a low first round pick at the end of the day, because Luka is as good as Luka is, along with like Alec Burks and Nerlens Noel? So you're essentially shedding like $19 million. And the going rate for shedding that amount of money tends to be a late first round pick. I wonder if Oklahoma City could do something like that with that open space.
Well, the problem with that is the timing, because that open space with Oklahoma City expires once free agency starts. I mean, they would have to do that at the draft. And at the draft, no one's ever tampered in the NBA. No one's ever hired anyone's dad to be an assistant with their team. So they're just going to have no idea of Jalen Brunson's interest in signing with them. I mean, if the Knicks,
maybe this is the whole reason they hired Rick Brunson, is for,
because
like,
you can't
tampering purposes.
Yeah, you can't tamper. No, my theory is no one knows Rick Brunson's salary. I mean, my theory is if you really want to tamper, you make Rick Brunson the highest paid assistant in the history of the NBA, And for those who don't know, the Knicks just hired Jalen Brunson's dad, who's a longtime Tibbs assistant.
He's been like in multiple spots with Tibbs. Like
he's been a Tibbs favorite for a very long time.
Family member hire.
Yeah, and there have been Stephen Bondi from the Daily News reported that they were trying to get Brunson like weeks ago or months ago, maybe even. And but yeah, if you really want to circumvent the cap, you pay Rick Brunson like $20 million a year to be your assistant coach. And then you sign Jalen Brunson. And then you just sign Jalen Brunson for the mid-level. And you just have Rick funnel the money to sign. What? I can't buy my son a house. I make a great living. Can't buy my son a car. Can't take my son to dinner. Just have Rick funnel the money. Put it in a trust. Work. Yeah. It's the move. I don't know why everyone doesn't do it.
It's like a college hiring a family member to get the kid as a recruit.
Is, you know, it's there were multiple people who hit me up when they hired Rick Brunson, and they were like, that is so college. It's just so college.
So
it's so like Mizzou hiring Michael Porter Jr.'s dad.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of exactly it. Okay. Look, I don't know if they're going to sign Jalen Brunson. I understand why they would consider it. RJ Barrett extension number. Do you think that they can get something done here? Or do we think that RJ tries to push for the max and doesn't get the max? Like what is an equitable RJ Barrett number?
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, I'm actually working on a bigger story about RJ extension stuff and talking to a lot of people trying to get an idea of his market. I think RJ will push for the max. I do. I don't see why the Knicks would offer the max. And I think, look, I think RJ has a chance to become a really good player. Like I think he has a chance to become an all-star. But you look at the guys who get max contracts and rookie extensions, and they're just like, they tend to be the Trae Youngs of the world, the guys who are like, this guy is already there. And I think RJ has a chance to get there, but he's not there yet. Like he had a 51% true shooting last year. And we saw a lot of improvement from him in terms of his decision-making and just kind of evolution of who he is stylistically. He had a very, very, very conscious awakening right around New Year's where he decided, you know what? Like I'm not a jump shooter. So I'm just going to play. He basically decided I'm just going to play like Jimmy Butler. I'm big. I'm really strong. I can just bully my way to the rim. He became obsessed with free throws. He texted his trainer something on New Year's Eve. He was in the midst of a big slump. He was like, I'm done with this. I'm going at the rim nonstop. And he took like 10 shots in the restricted area that night. And it just persisted. I believe he took the third most shots in the paint per game after the new year, which is a large sample size. I mean, it's 3.5 months in the entire league. Only LeBron and Giannis took more. So you look at that evolution, you're like, that's pretty good. Like a guy being that self-aware, I think is a great sign. And he got to the line 7.5 times a game during that period, which is an incredible number for a 21-year-old. But it's hard to justify giving him the max. You know, he scored 20 a game this year, but it's hard to justify giving him max when the efficiency numbers are that low. Also, when he's just going to be restricted, and you can just say, okay, if you're a max player, we'll just pay you when you're restricted. Like normally, he's the kind of guy who has to meet in the middle. And where the team says, you know what, fine, well, you get some more security, knowing that you are locked into this number and you're going to make a whole ton of money for a really long time. And we get to know that even if you blow up this year, we don't have to pay you the maximum number that we have to pay you. We get you at a little bit of a discount. And I think that's how that stuff tends to go. I don't know how it's going to go. I've heard comparisons to like the John Collins number. They can't extend him for 5 years like John Collins got. I think they can only do 4. They can only go 5 if it's a max deal. But you know, I've spoken to some people. A lot of people have him in that like 25 a year number, which is well short of his max.
So like that's the number that makes sense to me. It's almost like comparable to Jaylen Brown, like based on a percentage basis of what Jalen is going to get like on the cap compared to when Jalen was restricted or going into restricted free agency and extension eligible. Yeah, like I wonder if like 25, 26 is the number, and whether or not RJ takes that is up to him, and we'll see where it goes. I don't know. Yeah, it feels like one of those ones. It's a tough one. It's a very, very difficult one to figure out. Mitchell Robinson. Any thoughts on retaining him?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were, he was extension eligible, and they could offer him that same extension that Dallas could offer Jalen Brunson, 4 for 55. I never got the sense that they were anywhere close on extension numbers. I don't know exactly. I think Mitch wanted, that 4 for 55. I don't know exactly what the Knicks were offering, but I never got the sense that they became close on an extension. And technically they can still extend him until free agency starts. That said, like, I don't see Mitchell Robinson getting less than the mid-level. Someone's giving him the mid-level. But like there aren't very many room teams. The only room team that I really see as a possibility for him is Detroit. I wouldn't be surprised if Detroit made a run at him. I wouldn't be surprised if Toronto was interested. They've kind of been on the prowl for a center, and he's obviously a really good shot blocker and rim protector and rim diver. I think he'd make sense there. They just love length, and someone will want him. It's kind of like what we were talking about with Grant Williams, to be honest. Like, I think he's somewhere in that range with what the other centers got, 4 for 40, 4 for 45, maybe 10, 12, 13 million a year. And maybe he ends up taking maybe the market craps out on him because he's a rim diving center. And sometimes it does that to those sorts of players. And he says, you know what, I'm going to bet on myself and do a 1+1 at the full mid-level with somebody and try to hit restricted free or hit unrestricted free agency in 2023 and figure that out. But I do think for the most part, like, I don't see him making less than the mid-level. And I don't see why the Knicks wouldn't bring him back for the mid-level unless they were just like really concerned about his fit with Randle and RJ Barrett, which would be reasonable because offensively you just can't have that many guys inside the 3-point line and be really good.
Right. Yeah, it's hard. It's because you don't want to lose the asset for nothing, but like you can just move the asset at some point. So like,
exactly.
Keep the guy.
I'm a big believer on just, you got to keep the guy. Like if you didn't, it's kind of like what I was saying about Kyrie. Like if you're just going to let him walk, you drafted this dude in the second round. He's 24 years old. He's a good player. It's not like he's not a good player. He's a good player. You can't just let him walk for nothing. I think you need to bring him back. And if you get him for the mid-level or 12 mil, like that's movable. You can then move off of that and get something else.